had who had a nice break? No. I don't think you can answer who had a nice break with no. Doesn't make sense. So you didn't have a nice break. I didn't have a nice break. I was really looking forward to it. And the whole time, I just had to do admin stuff. And I had all these dreams of all these wonderful fun things I was going to do. And how I wished I could have spent the whole holidays just programming. But sadly, I had to do stupid admin stuff. What did you guys end up doing your holidays? What's that? Stupid computing stuff. I'm sorry.
Politicians with scientific names.
Giving, what's that?
Classifying politicians with scientific names.
Are there any politicians that have scientific names?
Yes, Kevin Rudd, earwax digestus.
Okay. All right. Okay, so you've all done different things, and that's good. Now we're in the second half of the course. We're actually, the break more or less marks the middle, so it's like the second half of the course. I had this idea that I could just do it as a reflection of the first half. And we could just run the first half backwards, and this would be like the peak of your knowledge, and then by the end, we'd take you back to where you began. I was inspired in this thinking by a book that I discovered to my joy that I have not read for many, many years. The Annotated Alice. I discovered it at a remaindering shop or a second-hand bookshop. It's Alice in Wonderland, and Alice Through the Looking Glass, but annotated by Martin Gardner. And Martin Gardner, I've mentioned him in lectures before, a completely brilliant mathematician and amazing thinker all round, has written notes to Alice in Wonderland. And I remember the first time I read this, I couldn't believe it. On some pages there'd be like one line of Alice in Wonderland and then a page of notes. Like it's all in two-column format. Don't know if you can see it. So one column Alice in Wonderland, one column notes. And it's the most amazing book. The guy that wrote Charles Dodson, the guy that wrote Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll, was a mathematician, and we've been sort of fooling around with his stuff at the start of each lecture, looking at some of his logical syllogisms. He wrote it as a mathematician, and it's this book that exists on two levels. On one level, it's just a story for kids, and on another level, it's this amazing exploration of maths and thought and philosophy and science and everything. And you can read it as a child and it's just this funny story, or you can read it as an adult and it's the most amazing book you've ever read. For example, in Alice Through the Looking Glass, I don't know if anyone remembers that one, every encounter she has, everything she does is actually the move in a chess game. And she's the pawn. And as she goes through the game, she meets people who are next to her, and they're either pieces on her side or on the opposing side. And every encounter is actually a move in the game. And then the game finally finishes with her reaching the back row and becoming a queen. And that actually leads to a checkmate if you've actually played the game out. So, but you could completely read the story and not notice that at all. But it's this most amazing thing. Now, I was reading in the intro to Alice Through the Looking Glass, just a little bit of sort of whimsy about how the story actually started. Listen to this. A girl called Alice, not the famous Alice, Alice Little, one day, hearing my name, he called me to him saying, "So you are another Alice. I'm very fond of Alices. Would you like to come and see something which is rather puzzling?" We followed him into his house, which opened as ours did upon a garden, into a room full of furniture with a tall mirror standing across one corner. "Now," he said, giving me an orange, "first tell me which hand you have got that in." "The right," I said. "Now," he said, "go and stand before that looking glass and tell me which hand the little girl you see there has got it in." After some perplexed contemplation, I said, "The left hand." "Exactly," he said. "And how do you explain that?" I couldn't explain it, but seeing that some solution was expected, I ventured, "If I was on the other side of the glass, wouldn't the orange still be in my right hand?" I can remember his laugh. "Well done, little Alice," he said. "That's the best answer I've had yet." Now, the reason that made me smile and happy when I read that was for years when I used to teach at high school, and I used to teach very smart little kids, children, one of the first things I'd give them was this puzzle. Can anyone write in mirror writing? Does anyone have that special skill? Yes, you do. Are you too shy to come down and do it?
It takes ages though.
Could you do it while I'm talking? Could you write something like, I'm stuck in a mirror? Yes. Help, I'm stuck in a mirror. I'm very envious of your skill. What's your name? Jay. Jay, I'm very envious of your skill.
So, I'm stuck in a mirror?
Yeah, I'm stuck in a mirror. Shh, 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 shh. While she's writing that, listen, listen, listen. I used to ask the kids, why is it that when you look into a mirror, the writing is backwards? Shh, 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 shh. Because I don't want you to answer this, even if you know the question. Why is it that the writing is backwards, but it's not upside down? Why is it that the mirror appears to reverse left and right and not up and down? Yet the mirror is in the left and right and up and down plane. Why is that? That doesn't make sense. Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, hand. All right, let's put the lights on that. Here we go. It's so hard to read, isn't it? We're just so used to reading it one way. But can you see? It's reversed left to right, but it's not reversed top to bottom. Yet why is one of the two dimensions of the mirror preferenced over the other dimension? What's going on? No, I don't want you to answer this. I just asked the kids this in the first lesson I had with them. I'd say, I just want you to think about this, and at the end of the course, I want you to tell me the answer. Shh, shh. What's that? I'd like them to think about it over the duration of the course. And in fact, in your last week, I'm going to ask you guys the answer to this question too. Now, I want to talk about task 2. We'll come back to mirrors in a second. Because you've just finished task 2, and I sort of wanted to tell you A, why we had task 2, and B, what I hoped you got out of task 2, and then C, I'm going to talk about how I solved task 2 and my approach to task 2. So why do we have task 2? My objective in this course, as you know, is I want you to think as a computer scientist with the scientist underlined. I want you to sort of think about computing. There are many ways to view computing and do computing, and they're all equally good, and you've got to have them all in your toolbox. And one of them is the scientific approach. And if you don't have it in your toolbox, you don't always use that approach, but if you don't have it available to you, then you're just a hacker. So I wanted to have an assignment that in some sense involves science. So I got you to keep notebooks, because scientists keep notebooks. In fact, a scientist was telling me recently the notebooks are legal documents and can be produced in a court of law. And scientists log every single thing they do in their notebook, except I think I called it a journal. So this was an assignment where I did want you to log everything you did in that same sense. And I wanted you to go through a journey of discovery. Now notice, it's quite hard to do this in computing, because normally computing is a journey of creation. And science is a journey of discovery. So in science, what scientists often are trying to do, or usually, is try and understand the world, discover things about the world. There's some world out there using their sensors and the machines they've manufactured and the tests they've constructed. They're trying to get more information about that world. In computing, we're normally constructing artifacts, and it's more a construction engineering sort of thing. But I want you to take I wanted to have a scientific sort of approach where you'd be discovering something. Now, something that is an interesting thing to ponder is, for example, just to get this distinction fixed in your mind, mathematics, the field of mathematics, would you say that when we do mathematics, are we inventing things, creating things, or are we discovering things? Discovering. So the rules of maths are sort of laid down by God or the universe or something, and we are discovering them. Okay. Would anyone else have another point of view? Dylan? The axioms we've picked are just ones that we've picked. Yeah. It could be completely different. We could have picked, Euclid's got 4 postulates that give us Euclidean geometry. We could have picked another one. In fact, there's a lot of debate about the 5th postulate. The set axioms we've got, we keep debating about what should be in and what should be out of the set axioms. Maybe arithmetic could have turned out differently if we hadn't taken the piano axioms. So it's not clear when you do maths. Some mathematicians believe they're on a journey of discovery. Some mathematicians believe they're on a journey of creation. If Well, what about poetry? When you're a poet and you write a poem, are you creating something or discovering something? I mean, in some sense, if you wrote every poem in ASCII, it's just an enormously long number. Let's suppose we consider all poems that are less than 1,000 characters long. That's a 1,000-byte number. That's just a number. All those poems exist instantly as soon as I say that. Every possible poem that's less than 1,000 characters long exists. And perhaps the journey of a poet is just someone who goes around and discovers the interesting ones that are there. We talked about that game a long time ago. Someone discovered what it was called. Was it Elite or something? Or Elite, where the universe was created from a random number generator. And people would explore this space, but the creators of the game didn't have to actually define the whole space because it was generated by the random number generator, the configuration of all the different galaxies. People used to love going around looking for crazy places, trying to find odd galaxies. There was one galaxy you could get to, or one planet, which just by sheer coincidence, with all the way all the random numbers work, if you ever got to this place, you could, the game started with you in this configuration, you were doomed because there was no planet you could get to in any direction that was reachable. Now, people used to do lots of fun hunting around trying to find these things. There was a huge number of them, so you couldn't find them all. So were these people discovering? They thought they were on a journey of discovery that this thing was already there, but in a sense the random number generator was invented. I don't know. It's this hard question. Is poetry? You know, my intuition is we create poetry. Yeah. My intuition is I'm discovering maths. But when I look at it closely, my intuition isn't so good. Now, we can do the same trick with programs, and we started to do that we can view a program just as a number. And to make it really clear, we've sort of produced this 8BMC, or what do I call it? What do I call it?
4241.
42.
41 or 442 or something.
It's getting confusing now, isn't it? There's so many variants because we've got this virtual world of possible chips we've just come up with. Let's say it's the 4242 because that's easier for me to remember. The 4242, every program going into the 4242 is just a number, and at most it's 16 bytes long. Oh, well, 16 nibbles long, 16 lots of 4 bits long. So every program that can ever be written sort of exists, and you've written an assignment recently where you're exploring, hopefully trying to discover programs with interesting properties. Those, in a sense, all exist, though when you first approached the ding challenge to make the most dings, I imagine you thought you were inventing programs, and you were creating and using your brains, you were inventing amazingly dingy programs. Yeah, or the busy bit. Does that all make sense? So I wanted to have an assignment that had this flavour of there is something out there that's complex we don't know about and we're going to explore it. So I wanted you to explore the space of all possible 4242 programs. Okay. Now, that's why we picked that program as an assignment, well, amongst other reasons. Now I want to talk about my approach to it. Now, I did this program myself. And the reason I'm doing this is every year I want to do this and I never manage to pull it off because assignments come in late and everyone gets extensions, that by the time you're in a position to talk about an assignment, people have already forgotten it and moved on to the next assignment. We're in the middle. And I just really, so that's why I sort of made it during the middle of the holidays. I wanted to have it so that no matter what extensions we granted and whatever happened, boom, everyone's handed in by the first lecture after the holidays. There's nothing else in your mind, nothing else is happening, and bang, I can talk about it and still in your mind, hopefully it'll make sense. So I'm going to talk about how I did it. Now, I don't want this to depress you if you did it a different way, because I'm the lecturer and you're the student, and I invented the problem and imposed it upon you. But I do want you to think about it, because for me, this assignment was all about approach. I don't really care how you solved the assignment or what answers you got. I care what approach you followed. And there are some good approaches and some bad approaches. And that's just, I want you to, that's the takeaway message in addition to this from the assignment that I want you to think about, the approach to the assignment. So this is an assignment I did first about a year ago in getting it ready for you guys. I knew a year out I'd be taking this course. So one lovely weekend I sat down and I'd been thinking for a while about a discovery type assignment I could have. And I decided this would be the one I did. And I sat down, and I thought I will, for this weekend, be a student and do this assignment. So here's how I did it. I wrote it in another language, by the way. I didn't write it in C, because I was just trying to get up to speed in another language at that time, because I was about to teach a course that needed another language, and I wanted to have it at my fingertips and pouring out of my ears. So I wrote it in another language which is slower than C. So I broke it into a couple of steps. Let's just think about the problem. The problem was you had to find, given the number n, you had, and a permutation which defined how the chip operated, you had to find of all the programs that were n bytes long that could have been fed into this chip, you had to find the one that ran the longest before eventually terminating. And although it's an amazingly small chip with only 4 bits and 16 registers, 16 memory locations, 4 bits per memory location, the complexity, hopefully you could see here, this was like an introduction to exponentiality. You could see how the complexity explodes even in that small size, which is a ridiculous size when you compare it to programs and problems you'll encounter in real life. And even in this small toy example, we could hit the complexity wall very, very quickly. So what I did was first of all, I went for a walk, and I did, because I'm an engineer as well as a scientist, and I thought, okay, I've only got this small amount of time to write it, and I want to, at the end, to have something quite good. So I don't want to waste my time. I want to make sure I spend my time as efficiently as possible, and I'm not wasting it on things that are not going to give me big bang for the buck. So I want to solve this problem the best I can. And by the way, at that point is when I decided that I would make the problem one where you had to find the best. I didn't want you just the longest running program. You didn't just have to find the best you could find. The first challenge we had, the Brownie challenge, if you remember, was to find the program, just print out more dings than anyone else. Now that's a heuristic sort of problem. You don't have to find the program that prints out the most dings. You've just got to print out more dings than someone else. It's like the old joke about, oh, what do you do when you see there's a lion coming for you? You're in the jungle and or I guess the veldt or wherever you are, that are lions, and you're there with your mate and the lion's coming at you, and one of the guys stops down and puts on his sneakers. And his friend says, what are you doing? There's no point putting on your sneakers. Sneakers or not, you're not going to be able to outrun the lion. And his friend said, I don't have to outrun the lion. So it's like that with the first assignment. You didn't have to find the best one. You just had to be better than everyone else. So the idea is, I didn't want that sort of an assignment. That sort of assignment is solved by AI. That's in the domain of AI. Coming up with the best solution you can, subject to constraints. We've got to navigate through a maze to rescue someone that's trapped in a building. And from the computer's point of view or the robot's point of view, it's a maze. We've got to navigate through there as quickly as we can to rescue someone. We've got to schedule our airlines to, in such a way that we have cheapest terminal time and our fuel's costs are as low as possible. We've got to allocate our teachers to classrooms and students to classrooms and things so that it's as cheap as possible to run the uni and as few as people as possible have to work in the evenings. We've got to, these are constraint problems. We don't actually find the best solution. Often we can't. It's too hard. We just got to find a solution that's quite good. And AI, when you get to the field of AI, there's lots of ways of them finding the best possible solution you can find that's reasonably good. But in this assignment, I wanted to just make the distinction between the best possible and the one, the answer. I wanted you not to be as good as you could. I wanted you to be correct. And to contrast the two, I thought it was sort of funny because I'm asking you to find the correct one, and I'm asking you to do it as quickly as you can. So although the subject matter of the assignment is complete correctness, the structure of the assignment is the best you can. Yeah, so your marks are awarded by how quickly you can find it. I'm not expecting anyone will find it the quickest that it's physically possible to find. I'm not expecting anyone will write the perfect how many function. Yes? Does that make sense? So we have both aspects, correct and best. So for me, thinking about it, when I sat down initially, I thought, okay, I'm going to write this. It's this weird, it's going to run on a weird microchip that I don't know much about. It's going to have a permutation plugged into it before it runs, so I don't know much about that. The programs that are going to run for a long time are going to have very weird and chaotic behavior. If you printed out and looked at any of your long-running ones, you'll have found that beyond a certain size, N, the longest running ones are quite hard to understand because they're doing all sorts of weird tricks. So it's involving a whole lot of things I'm not confident about. It's going to use tricks that I can't even dream of. Who wrote a Busy Beaver themselves by thinking up front a couple of weeks ago? Who wrote the Busy Beavers? Who tried the Busy Beaver challenge? Yeah, and did you do it by thinking and coming up with cunning programs? Yeah. Okay, now I know Z, you didn't. How did you write yours?
I had. I thinking about it.
But I'm pretty sure you wrote an AI.
No, I didn't.
Did anyone write an AI?
No.
No one wrote an AI to solve it? Oh, I was hoping someone would.
What do you define like AI?
Oh, you do some sort of heuristic search.
No, you couldn't do that in limited amounts of...
No, you couldn't do that for the assignment, but you could have done that for the Busy Beaver. Well, my thought was someone would write programs to search through the search space to try and find answers, and your way of doing it is to construct a really clever one, and you have a great understanding of what's going on. But you will find, except for very small values of n, that a computer following a stupid heuristic search algorithm will be able to outperform, and you've got very possibly the smartest man in the universe. No matter how smart you are, a really dumb computer running 1 billion times faster than you just has so much advantage that it can just try all sorts of dumb things while you're just carefully selecting the right thing. So for large values of n, a brute forcer or an AI will probably outperform a person. So that sort of tells us that for large values of n, or even non-trivial values of n, the complexity in this problem is greater really than our mind really understands. And so I'm just trying to say all these points to let you see there's a whole lot of things lining up here that makes us nervous. We're not really going to understand what's going on at the limit, and this assignment's all about at the limit. We'll understand it in retrospect when we find it, but we won't be able to predict it in advance. It's going to be quite complex in an unfamiliar chip, so things could go wrong. And it's going to have to run for a really long time and do really complex things. And small mistakes could have like avalanche effects. Even the slightest mistake actually will completely kill us in the whole chain of things. So the nervousness I've got here is that there's a very good danger that when I write my solution to task 2, guys, hey, shh, 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 shh. When I write my solution to task 2, that it's going to be incorrect, is what I'm trying to say. So my biggest nervousness was, how do I know my task 2 is actually going to be correct? How do I know that I'm actually going to find the right answer? That I'm not going to make some silly mistake, and because it's so far from my intuition, if I made a silly mistake and the program printed something out, I'd probably just believe it. Now, some mistakes I can verify quickly, and some are much harder to find. And this is what made this a very interesting engineering problem. What mistakes can you check quickly when your program runs? What's easy to verify? Yeah.
It doesn't crash.
Well, yeah, you can verify it doesn't crash. So you can put something in, yeah, if it goes out of memory or does something nutty, it'll crash. Okay, cool. So we can check it doesn't crash, so that's good. Yes.
Prints out the right syntax.
Yeah, we can look at the syntax of what it prints out and see it makes sense. And given what it prints out, what can we do? If it says, here's a 12-byte program that runs for X steps, we can check it runs for X steps. When you've got a complex system, things like this are a godsend. We really want independent verification of things. So this gives us one chance for independent verification. So if it prints something out and claims it takes X steps, well, so first of all, we'll see if it runs or not, and that'll throw some problem up. And we're really going to be pushing it to the limit, trying it hard, stress testing it. So hopefully, if, you know, there won't be little subtle problems. Hopefully, because we're trying every combination, if there's a little mistake in there that's going to lead to a crash, hopefully we'll tease it out. But here, this is the interesting one, that if it makes a claim at the end, we can verify the claim. And that's, oh, good, that's a great relief to me. But then my second thought is what? That doesn't necessarily a complete relief because it may not be the best. I can verify that the program it produces is indeed as long as it says it is in execution time, but I can't verify that there is no longer program. That's a different sort of claim. That's much harder. And then straight away I'm nervous again. So I spent the whole first day of the 2 days I spent on this assignment just thinking about correctness, thinking how can I make it correct? Now, in the initial runs I did with Mei Cheng yesterday, or she did and I looked at yesterday, there are quite a few students who have handed in assignments which are not correct. Which is heartbreaking for everyone, actually, because looking at those assignments, there's an enormous amount of thought and energy and effort that's gone into writing that code. But if it's not correct, it doesn't matter how fast you've made it. It's like, I'm launching, we're not in a best solution, we're in a correct solution. I'm writing code to land the space shuttle. And I want to, you know, get to Earth as quickly as possible. And you write a brilliant program that gets to Earth really quickly, but it kills us. Can you see the correctness is the dominating feature here. So if we're not correct, we're in trouble. So, or what are other examples of programs? Or just any program that's not correct. Once we're in a program, in a correct situation where we require a correct it's a machine that is an automated robot that goes out and fights wars. And it has all these excellent advantages that the generals like. But if it's not correct, who cares? You know, can you just see for problems like that, problems where correctness is important, missing it is the killer. So I spent the whole first day just thinking about correctness. I reckon that those people, if you find out that your program is one of the ones that's not correct, it's really good that it happened now. And I hope the takeaway message for you is to think next time, I've got to make sure I put my energies in the most important spot, first of all. And the most important thing was to get correct. So I know it's not the most interesting thing. In fact, it's probably the least interesting thing. So we sort of want to jump over it and get up to the best. Get up to the fun optimizations and cool data structures. But if it's not correct, blah, we stuffed. So here's what I did on day one to work out correctness. Well, what do you think I did? What did you do to check that your code was correct? Compared it with a bit, yes. Luckily, I'd spent a long time in advance generating test cases using my brain, like you did. Generating really long-running test cases, and that's why I gave you the busy beaver. So by the time you hit this problem, you had a whole lot of cases you knew about it. It was with an unpermuted chip. It was with an unpermuted chip that was slightly different. But the instruction I changed, instruction 8, was very unlikely to have been used in your busy beaver solution. And certainly most of your busy beaver solutions, even if it was used in some of them, wouldn't have used instruction 8. So I think tweaking instruction 8, while it might have meant your previous busy beaver solution wasn't the fastest, even if it was now previously the fastest, there may be faster ones that could use 8. Any 8 free code that ran should run the same on both chips. So we have a whole lot of really clever, cunning examples we've come up with ourselves. So we have some test cases without permutations. That's really cool. Number 2, what else? Oh, so we should look at the steps. We've got an emulator, presumably. Most people wrote an emulator solution. We've got a permuter. And then we've got our brute forcer that somehow searches calling on these. We've got to check that each of these are right. First of all, checking the emulator. I wrote a lot of tests for my emulator just to make sure it was right. How can this is testing it without permutations. How can I test it with permutations? So you can find permutations that don't affect the behavior of the program, run it and check that the program still runs the same way. But can you see we're still only testing a really limited case. And in fact, we're probably not testing where the permutation is likely to fail, which is in the things that it does differently. But yes, that's actually a really important test to do. Yes, that's right. In fact, I was thinking most people would do the other test, which is probably more obvious, which is check to see that when you permute things, things do change, and forget to check the, if you permute things that don't make a difference, that it still doesn't make a difference. Yeah, okay. So testing the emulator, let's just look at how I tested the emulator. I had a lot of test cases. I wrote some new code, and the new code I wrote, I made sure used every instruction. So I had a series of small programs that tried every instruction. And I tried to write it in such a way so that if the instructions differed or had a different interpretation, I wouldn't get the right output. There'd be some sort of avalanche effect. So maybe I'd write a multiply or all sorts of elaborate functions. But I made sure that every single instruction was used. And I built up a suite of these test cases. Then I had my unit test file and I plugged it through the emulator. And from now on, because you see what I'm going to do is tomorrow, I'm going to start making this faster, making this faster, and making this faster. Now, if I start fooling around and doing really clever stuff here, and I've already started off in a world that's unsure and complex and I'm nervous about, and I don't have a good understanding of, and is by definition then, in my mind, error prone. If I just jumped in straight away and started writing an optimized emulator before getting a base case that was error free, then I'm in big trouble because I'm just laying more complexity into the problem without any sort of testing case. Like, do you know that Monty Python, the Holy Grail, when the guy goes, he says something like, one day this will all be yours, son. And the boy says, I don't want a castle. I don't want to live here. And he says, no, that's wonderful. This castle was built on courage and determination, and I built it. Everyone said you're mad to build it in the swamp, but I don't care. I built it anyway, and it sank. So I built another one, and it sank. So I built another one. It burned down, fell over, and sank. But I built another one on top of all those three, and it stayed, and it's here today. This essentially is what we've got in engineering when we approach a hard problem or a new problem like this, that we've got to get certainty, and we've only got a whole lot of uncertain, unreliable components to join together to build this certain, reliable system. So we have to build it in such a way that gives us certainty. In the old days on the boats, the mariners would do this. If you needed to get a big, heavy cable line across to another boat, how do you get a big, heavy line across to another boat? It's the middle of a storm.
Throw like a small line.
Yeah, that's right. You get a bow and arrow or something like that. And you go, pring, and you fire it into the captain on the other side. And behind it is a little thread. And then you grab that thread and you tie, what do you tie to the end of the thread? A string. And you pull the thread across, and that pulls the string across. And then what do you tie to the string? Like a medium-sized piece of rope. And you pull the string and that pulls the medium rope across. And then to the medium rope you tie the big rope, and to the big rope you tie the enormous anchor cable that can be like that big. You could never have got the enormous anchor cable across on the thing. But somehow by building on top of building on top of building, by getting certainty on top of certainty, we can slowly construct a system that is reliable out of a whole series of limited components. So we've got to do this. So my approach, and I hope your approach, is first day, let's get correctness. Second day, let's start doing the exploring, exciting stuff and getting it better. But now we've got a correct test bed, and we're going to constantly compare any results we get with our modified code. We're going to run back against our initial code, which we have confidence is correct. And we're going to log every single thing we do because we're scientists, and when things go crazy or askew, we're going to notice it straight away. Okay, so one interesting way of testing the permuter that I came up with was this. If your program never regards data as code, and you'll notice over and over again that what makes this assignment work is the ambiguity between data and code, that the data and code are intermingled in our architecture, and at any point an instruction that previously was data can now be used as code. So we sort of get, 2 for 1 out of everything. We can run stuff as data and code. And you can pack your program in really tightly. If it turns out the data you're storing, you can also execute at some time and so on. And when you need constants, they're already in the code as instructions, you can use them. So there's this sort of overlap between code and data. But if we write programs that never confuse code and data, we might have to write them ourselves, because busy beavers probably already do that, then these programs can be permuted completely safely and will have exactly the same behavior. So I wrote a big suite of programs that never confused code, never regarded ambiguously a memory cell as containing code, a value, as being simultaneously code and data. And the delicacy with this assignment is you had to make sure that your registers were regarded as initially containing code, because they're initialized to halt. So you had to write programs that didn't rely on the registers as data, the initial values in the registers as data. So I wrote a series of programs like this, and then I can run them through the permuter. And the nice thing about that is I should get this independent verification that code run through one chip produces this output, permuting the code, run through the permuter to give me new permuter code, chip dash, code dash. That's not good. Chip, gives the same output. Does this make sense? This is giving us independent verification. So we permute the chip, we permute the code, we run it, and we still should get the same. This is still not testing the case of programs where the code and the data are intermingled, and we have to test those by hand. And we can only test a small number of those because I couldn't work out a clever way of automating that. Nonetheless, at the end of the day, I had built up an enormous test suite of programs that would verify and monitor the output of my code. And then I wrote, at the very end of the day, the last thing I wrote was a random generator. And this random generator generated random programs and pumped them through and had little stubs in it for instrumenting or recording the results as it was running. And this meant I could start to tabulate data. I could start to understand the search space I was exploring. And I recorded, for example, interesting statistics, like for programs of size 10, what proportion of them are loop-free? What proportion of them have loops? What proportion of them halt? What proportion of them go into an infinite loop? What proportion of them print things out? What proportion don't print things out? And I just came up with a whole lot of statistics like that. Does that make sense? This is very nice, because now for large values of n, when I write my optimized faster programs to search through the space, and I'm up in big spaces, large values of n that I can't possibly brute force in my testing, because my whole thing is to get the assignment to brute force it, I can run my randomized thing on this modified code, on my improved stuff, and I can check that I'm still seeing 12% have infinite loops, 88% have loops. If I find that these overall statistics remain the same, then it gives me further confidence that the new modified programs I'm writing, which are now infinitely faster, are producing the right results. So I, with my slow programs, randomly probe the space to get the statistics that I expect to see confirmed by my exhaustive searches. So all this is just giving me information that I can use to check the reliability of my code. And then I looked at everything and I was happy and I went to sleep. All night dreaming of the clever things. Now the really hard thing for me with this assignment was, as soon as I saw the assignment, I started thinking of clever things you could do. And the clever things dominated my every thought. It was very hard not to think of the clever things and not to want to do the clever things straight away. I've mentioned previously how I solved this problem. Do you remember? How do I solve this problem of wanting to jump in and do the hacky clever thing? Did everyone else have the same problem? You look at the spec and straight away you think, oh, I know how to make this fast. I could do some clever thing. And you start all your attentions on this really clever thing you could do to make it fast, rather than the main game. Write it down, put it away. Yeah, that's right. So I had a big list of all my possible ideas. And whenever I had an idea, I would write it on the list. And then I wouldn't have to actually program it. I'd just have to write it. And it's much faster to write than program. And I started to build up a very big list, but I was making sure I wasn't wasting any time programming it. I woke up the next morning and I went for a big walk. And on the walk, I thought of lots more ideas about ways I could make it faster. And I was in my, I don't know the different hats. You know, what's his name? De Bono has this idea of different hats. I can't remember what colour hat I was wearing. It's probably my puce hat. And the idea is there's this hat that's a creative hat. And you put it on to think of great ideas. And when you've got this hat on, you're never allowed to be negative and say that's a dumb idea. Or you might prematurely kill an idea that later on turns out to have a brilliant idea inside it. So I put on my puce hat and I was just walking around thinking of crazy ideas, and I wasn't trying to think why they wouldn't work. I was only trying to think why they would work. And at the end of the long walk, I came back home and I added them to my list that I'd been writing ever since I started thinking of the assignment. And I then had an enormous long list of ideas that I thought would give me speed ups and be really clever. And it was clearly, at this point, way too much to do in the remaining day. Now, I reckon even if it had only been these things, it would have been too much to do in the remaining day. But you know how optimistic we are. It wouldn't have been clearly too many. I'd have sat out thinking, oh, I can do it. And I'd have tried really hard. But luckily, the list got so long, I couldn't even fool myself into thinking it was possible to do. So then what do you think I did? I had an enormous long list of stuff.
Break it down.
What's that?
Break it down into components.
In what way? Break it into components?
Oh, like, you know, you've got a list, right? You've
Yes.
got a list of lots of things to do. Like,
Yes.
you know, gather up what's related.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. Okay. That's right. I'm going to do that. I'm going to get to that next. But that's a good idea. His idea was this. Maybe lots of the things in the list are related. And maybe solving one of them will help you solve some of the others. So it's not as though that the amount of work each of them takes has to be added together. Maybe there's lots of commonalities, and taking one whole approach might have 57 clever ideas. So that's good.
I'm actually going to sort of put another way to say, like, you know how a linked list sort of works?
Yes.
Like a tree.
Like a linked list. Yeah.
Just sort of arrange it in a tree or something so you can, okay, we'll do this, then we'll do this.
So arrange it in a tree to give you the order in which... Yeah. So what I reckon the approach is, the question you're raising there, which is arrange them in a list or a tree so you know what order to do them in. I reckon the key part of that idea is you have to work out what order you're going to do these things in. Because you only have a small amount of time, you're not going to get through the whole list. Make sure you do the most important ones first. So what I did then was I drew what we call a quadrant diagram. Has anyone encountered a quadrant diagram? Oh, management people use them all the time. It's just like for plotting two things against each other, but when you don't have real numbers, you just...
It's just the quadrant diagram is about plotting important and urgent.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, in time management, that's what you use it for. So in time management, you plot important versus urgent. In security, you plot likelihood versus the magnitude of the problem and likelihood of the problem happening. So the idea is, I plotted here how much saving I would get from the idea and how much coding it would take. And I found there were some things that gave me, there were only some of the ideas, I just plotted all my points in here randomly. Not randomly, but without much thought, just making sure they get in the right quadrant. Other than that, it was fairly rough. For each idea on my list, I plotted it in here and I worked out some of them wouldn't take me very long to write and they wouldn't give me much saving. Some of them wouldn't take me much time to write and they'd give me a huge saving. Some of them would take a long time to write and they'd give me a huge saving. And some of them would take a long time to write and they'd give me a little saving. How did I know how much saving they were going to give me? What's that? Thank you very much. The statistic program from last night. So I'd form a hypothesis. I'd think, for example, I could put some energy into detecting this sort of loop. And I can have this strategy which detects this sort of loop very quickly. And for loops like that, it will detect them within 10 instructions. So then I run my randomized inspector program, and I get it to tell me what proportion of programs have loops like that, and how long it would take to find a loop like that given my existing strategy. And then I work out the overall savings I'll get by doing it in 6 instructions rather than the last one. And I might find that that sort of loop is very rare. And the total amount of savings it would give me would be 12% on the whole program. And this line here I decided was my 2 times line. So if you gave me less than a 2 times speed up, it was trivial. If it was more than a 2 times speed up, it went up the top. So any ideas that gave me a 10% speed up or a 15% speed up or something like that, they just go down in the not much speed up. And anything that gives me more than a 2 times, and there were a couple in here that gave me 1,000 times. So what I do then is I look, first of all, essentially, I do everything in this quadrant first. Everything that doesn't take much time to program and gives me enormous bang for buck. And then I just systematically go around through the quadrants, sort of coming in, or I'm not quite sure, some envelope of it, I don't know, you'd have to work it out. But there's sensible order. And the idea, it wasn't the random order or the first order that came into my head. Now I want to go back to talking about mirrors to make this point really clear. What I found when I asked my students why mirrors reflect left and right and not up and down was that there wasn't a single person in the room. Oh yeah?
I was just going to say, how do you know how much improvement you're going to get without coding?
No, that's what I just said. I run my randomized tester. So my randomized tester enumerates numbers of cases. So I have a theory, for example, that I can detect a particular sort of loop. I run my randomized thing to detect what proportion of loops, what proportion of programs have that sort of loop. Now, and I might run it on n of size 10 or whatever my target is I'm going for. And obviously it's very slow. It's on my original code, so it just tries random samples, but it's sampling that space. And it tells me 5% of programs have this sort of property. And then it tells me how long the loops are on those 5% of programs. Because I've written a whole lot of instrumentation code yesterday. And then I think, oh, okay, so this is overall, it'll give me a 12% speed up over the whole thing. That's a small speed up, so I don't bother with that strategy. It was exciting and brilliant, and I was really proud of that idea. It was really clever. And if I was a hacker, I'd have jumped in and coded it straight away, but now I realize it lives down here. And I never, ever need to look at it. Yeah. With the mirror problem, I mentioned the mirror problem before. What I found was that every single student, as soon as I gave them the mirror problem, was instantly confident that they knew the solution. And this is the same when I meet adults too. I've never met anyone that you state this problem to that instantly isn't confident that they know the solution. It's just human nature, I think. I think when they say, I know the solution, what they mean is, I've looked at mirrors a lot, and I'm not surprised that that happened because I've seen that happen before. But that's not knowing the solution. And I would find that my students would, I'd say, give me the answer at the end of term. And most of the students would straight away say, I can give you the answer now. I'd say, I'd like you to keep thinking about it. Tell me at the end of term. They say, no, I know the answer now. And I say, well, write it down and give it to me at the end of term. None of the ones that wrote down the answer now had the right thing. If you write it down now, or maybe you're a genius, maybe you got it. I mean, I don't want to say that. You guys are really smart. There's no doubt about that. But it's human nature. So I don't mean to belittle you. You might well have the solution now. Sitting in this room, there might be 10 people that know the right answer already. You might all know the answer already. But I think it's human nature that when we see something that we're roughly familiar with and we want to do something, we just, in our minds, we make it so. We think that's what the case is. So with the mirror problem, and I will ask you at the end of semester what you think it is. And look, let me say, psychologists always tell me, oh yeah, it's easy, it's just perception. And they tell me all this stuff about perception. Physicists spend all their time drawing diagrams with light particles, explaining it's some property of light. Yeah? Mathematicians talk about dimensions and symmetry, or depending on various things, what they're interested in. Everyone has their hammer and sees it as a nail. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, all right. The approach I'm trying to encourage is an approach of analysis and carefulness. And then as soon as I made a change, every time I made any improvement, I'd cross it off the list, and then I'd run it through my suite of tests. And I'd check that I still got the same proportion of loops, that all the permuted code that I wrote that's permutable safely would still permute, that my sample handcrafted programs that test every instruction still run. And I'd run it through that suite of tests, and it was automated, because I automated it all on the first day, and I'd just push a button and go to the kitchen, and it would run these tests in half an hour or something, and it'd go, bing, you got it, everything's okay. And then I'd move on to coding the next one. And I only coded 3 or 4 of them up. And I must have tested 10 or 15 of them to see if they were worth doing. And really, it was only 2 of them that made a really big difference. And the difference from those two was so enormous that it completely swamped everything else. So now I don't know if we want to drift into talking about the answers to this assignment. I haven't seen anyone yet who has some of the things that I was hoping to see, but I'm hoping there are still some out there. I haven't looked at everyone. But I'm thinking maybe I won't tell you the amazing things, and I might just leave it as an open puzzle for you to think about. Or you want me to tell you? Let me give you a rough hint then, at least. You have to make your program correct. There's no doubt about that. Get that right. Number two is you think, okay, then I'll brute force it. I'll go through checking everything. I'll check every program and I'll verify it, and I just have to make that as fast as possible. So take what you've done up here and make it fast. I think this is step two. And you make it fast using data structures. For example, one of the ideas that gives a reasonable size speed up, or a big one, depending on how you did it initially, is loop detection. If you instrument your code, you'll find, if you've got a poor loop detection algorithm, that you'll spend a considerable amount of your time stuck in loops that you didn't have to be in. Now, not all programs have loops. In fact, a very surprisingly small proportion have interesting loops in it that can't be detected trivially. So you don't have to put much effort into it to knock out 99.999% of all your loops. So going after the remaining ones isn't necessarily that hard or interesting or big bang for the buck to do, but there are some clever ways of using algorithms, of data structures you've seen, and for example using hashing to detect state collisions to detect loops. So there are some interesting sort of loopy stuff you can do. So phase two is just, I think, tweaking your code to make it faster. But I found very few things that happened in phase two actually gave me a big improvement. The big improvement came in phase three, where rather than trying to do exactly what you did before but just do everything faster, you say, maybe I don't have to do everything I did before. Maybe there are some programs that I don't ever have to look at because they can't take longer than the current longest I've got. And in fact, it turns out, well, I mean, there's probably even stage 4 that I haven't got up to, but for me, so far where I am, this was where the big bang for the buck came. And it turns out, in fact, there are huge numbers of programs that with a little bit of thought, you never need to look at. Now, the danger here is this. You think, I've got a crazy theory. Someone once told me, you never have to look at a program unless it's got a loop instruction, a jump instruction, as the last instruction. You don't have to look at any other ones because they can't possibly be as long as that. And I said, are you sure about that? And they said, yeah, I'm sure. And I said, oh, that's amazing. I've long conjectured that. Show me your proof. I don't have a proof. I just know it. I mean, I can wave my hands and tell you it's going to happen because there's got to be a loop at the end. And I go, oh, okay. Just out of interest, have you ever had the problem about a man reflecting in a mirror? What do you think the answer is? Oh yeah, I know the answer to that too. That's it. So you want this to be true. It would be so convenient if it was the case that only if the last instruction was a loop was the thing actually going to go and be a longest program. That will speed you up by a factor of 16. So we want that to be true so much. It's true. But that's not science. So I think the danger here is, the danger here of knocking things out is that we are all likely to knock out things that shouldn't be knocked out just by sheer excitement at realizing the enormous speed up it's going to give us. So there needs to be an actual proof that what you are knocking out is actually not physically possible to ever be longer, so there's no need to look at it. And it can't just be, I can't think of a way it can be. You actually have to prove that it never can be. Now, this requires skepticism. And this is very dangerous territory. Nonetheless, this is where I got my speed ups. I want to talk a little bit about skepticism because I said up front that that was for me one of the most important things from science that I'd like us to take away in computing, because we always do things and try and trick ourselves into thinking they're correct. I'm looking at myself here. If I had one of those things and I wasn't a vampire, I would be looking at myself here, not you guys. But we always want to believe that what we want to believe is correct. That's just human nature. I remember once, no, I won't even tell you that. So, no, because it's controversial. So, There was a famous paper put out by some researchers in the, it came out in 92 or something. I've got a reference for it actually on the lecture notes already, by two people called Oliner and Oliner, came out in 92. And the paper is called The Altruistic Personality, Rescuers of Jews in Nazi Europe. And this paper looked at, long after the event, because of course as the Nazis moved through Europe, the Jews were terribly persecuted, and the countries that the Nazis were moving into already knew that what was going to happen to the Jews, because, I mean, not completely the whole story, I guess, but they knew it wasn't good for the Jews as the Nazis came in. And it was very interesting that different countries and different people did different things as the Nazis came into their country and invaded their country. And in some countries, like I read a wonderful story once about in Denmark, how taxi drivers used to just, when they heard the Germans were coming in, they would randomly drive to a phone box, grab the phone book out of the phone box, and drive round to every local address they could find of someone with a surname that sounded Jewish, and just throw them all in their cab and then drive them to the port. So that was amazing. And I've also heard other horrible stories of people that would just sit there quietly and then turn their neighbours' Jews in when the Germans turned up. Or people that disapproved of it but did nothing. And Oliner and Oliner did this research, retrospectively, trying to find out the difference between those people that helped the Jews actively, those that rescued the Jews at the risk of their own life when the Germans were coming, and those that did nothing. And they found this astonishing thing, that it had very, very small correlation to do with whether people were religious or not. The biggest correlation was to do with the upbringing the people, the rescuers, had as children. And it turned out that if your parents brought you up in an environment where you were not encouraged to question, where obedience was enforced, possibly by violence, and you were just told you have to obey and you had to believe and you had to do, those people were acquiescers. And if you were brought, on average, more likely to be. And if you were brought up in a family where your parents reasoned with you and explained things and gave reasons and encouraged you to question, those people were likely to be rescuers. It's going back to this authority questioning thing. But to me, it goes to the very heart of everything it takes to be a scientist, which is, if you want something to be true, or you just accept stuff, that's hopeless. That's not science. Science is skeptical. It's questioning, needing a reason for everything. And when you think, I can make my program 16 times faster, all I've got to do is make this assumption and believe that it's true, you have to be strong and not make that assumption. Or you have to test and come up with a proof. And it's very, very hard. So I hope talking about task 2 has made you reflect on your task 2. And I did not do it in any sense intending anyone to be depressed, because task 2 was an experience I wanted you to go through to encounter and think about these issues. Now at the end of the day we'll work out what everyone did, but I imagine most people's marks will be very, very similar. And I also expect in 3 or 4 weeks you're not going to care what your marks are, and certainly in 6 months' time you'll never look back at the task 2 marks and give a damn about them. But I hope that in 6 months' time, and going on into the future, that you remember the ideas that you got from task 2. All right, now, did anyone have any questions about task 2? Before, we'll take a break in a sec, but let me just grab some questions. Yes? Oh, if you're incorrect, you should get 0. But I was so heartbroken when I was looking at these assignments that I went all soft and mushy. No, it is. It is exactly like you're doing a mathematical proof of algorithms. No. This is what this assignment was about, being correct. So we wanted a correct program. And the hard part about this program isn't the clever ideas, it's working out how you can ensure that your program is correct. So for me, that is the whole point of this assignment, is to get it correct. And that's why the marking guide said explicitly up front, if you're incorrect, you'll get 0. It wasn't a joke, it was what I really wanted, because that was, for me, what this assignment is about. But nonetheless, I was so heartbroken when I looked at the assignments of people that had put obviously huge effort into the assignment and nonetheless had put in an incorrect assignment. That, what I decided, what Mei Cheng and I together decided, was we would give everyone 2 runs. And we would do 1 run on an unpermuted chip, because most people could get an unpermuted chip working fine. And then we would do another run on a permuted chip. And we would give you the average N that you got under both those runs. So if you made a mistake on the permuted chip, your N will be 0. But if you didn't make a mistake, then your N will be comparable under both and your average will be fine. But if you did, it's essentially just halving your N, but it's not making your N 0. And that's enough to give you reasonable marks. So that, And if you feel, too, that that's not just, that you have done great things that haven't been rewarded properly, just speak to your tutor and show them the great things. Okay. Because we don't want the marks to get in the way of your learning. I don't want anyone to think that in this case it was okay to be wrong. Because really, that's really exactly what this assignment was about. You didn't have to venture down here, but if you did, you were taking a big risk. So I hope you got it right if you did. Okay. It's certainly where the rewards were. Yes? Shh.
Yeah, I was kind of lazy to do number 3.
You didn't do 3? Well, then you're likely to be correct.
If you test for something that happens 1 in 16 times, and then it doesn't happen other 15 times, then wouldn't that usually slow the program down?
Yeah, if you test for something that only happens 1 in 15 times, yeah, if you test for something that occurs with low frequency, and that test is in the program you hand in, then the very nature of fact of doing the test will slow you down a bit. That's right.
So there were some tests where it actually made a difference.
Say it again.
Like where the tests were actually worth doing them.
Yeah, the tests, all the tests were worth doing. The question is whether tests were worth doing. All the tests are worth doing, but you do them over here. You don't do them on the thing you hand in. You do the tests.
Testing if it's worth testing that program, that memory or whatever, or just skipping on to the next one when you're doing your search.
I don't get the question. So you know what? Because we're running out of time, come and talk to me in the break and I'll repeat to everyone what your question was. So we'll sort it out between ourselves with a discussion and I'll repeat back. Were there any more task 1 questions? Shh, 2. Yes?
How fast is yours?
How fast was mine? Well, it was running on Java. So,
How fast could you do it in an hour?
how much? Well, and I didn't run it for an hour. So I ran it for different times. So the answer is I don't know. So I have to find my code and run it, and I will. Okay, I will. Also, I didn't have the bit instruction in there. I didn't have the modified instruction 8.
Oh, the instruction set.
Yes.
That's 1 step.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but I'm just saying, so my results aren't comparable. I ran it a year ago. I was going to run it over the holidays. I haven't run it again. Yep. Shh. Oh, what's the most anyone will get? Well, what's the biggest values people got? Shh. Did anyone get 10? Did anyone get 10?
How long? Or how long time?
10 in an hour. Did anyone manage to brute force all of size 10 in an hour? No one did 10 in an hour. Did anyone do 9? 9. Well done. Any other 9s? 9. Okay. All right. So it'll be 9. Be 9. If it is 9, then marks are handed out as follows: 5 marks for 9, 4 marks for 8, 3 marks for 7, 2 marks for 6, 1 mark for 5, 0 marks for 4. Yeah. That's my plan. We'll see how it goes. Okay. Let's take a break now, and I'll see you in 10 minutes' time.